Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today we have a very special hangout where we have the company of two very distinguished gentlemen, two Sanatani warriors, each contributing his might to the cause of the Dharma. I'd like to welcome T.R. Ramezji first. Ramezji, welcome to P Guru's channel. And
Thank you.
and for the first time on our channel, the one and only J. Sai Deepak. Sai Deepak, welcome to P Guru's channel. Sai, you have muted yourself for now. That's okay. I just wanted to let you know that you are on mute.
Right.
That's good. Excellent. Thank you. So a few words about these two distinguished gentlemen. Many of you may know them, but it's my duty to set the debate and set the context here. T.R. Ramezji won a major victory just a few days ago against the Tamilnadu government's decision, and he'll describe to us all about it when he is going to talk. And Sai Deepak caught our imagination when he was arguing for the Sabarimala temple at the Supreme Court a few years ago, and his star has been rising ever since. Very erudite person. I'm sure many of you saw his, debate between Owaisi and Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, which I thought he was one of the best moderated sessions that I've ever seen. So Sai, you have another future. You could be a great communicator. You could be a television personality. But that's all for the future. For now, the way we are going to have this thing is I'm going to yield the floor to Ramezji for about 10 minutes, where he is going to address the primary question of this debate. Is the government hurting or helping temples? And then after those 10 minutes or so, Sai Deepak will come in, and then we'll have a second part wherein we are going to talk about the remedial measures. If the control were to come back to the people, what are the ways that this needs to happen? What are the processes? And after that, we're going to have a Q&A session where we will be entertaining your questions. So without further ado, over to Sri Ramesh.
Thank you, Sri Ayarji. The question is, it is not that if the control were to come to the Hindu devotees or the communities, it is going to come. We are very positive, especially my good friend Sai is burning the midnight oil in that direction. Now, government control of temple is not something new, at least as far as the Madras presidency, the erstwhile Madras state and Andhra and part of Orissa, part of Malabar, Mysore, everything included. From 1927, government has been in one way or other controlling the temples, Hindu temples, endowments, and even the mutts. Now, the question is begging for an answer which is too obvious. Is government control hurting Hindu temples? Yes, it is hurting, and it's hurting beyond measure. We have classified it in 4 or 5 ways how government administration hurts temples. Number 1, the interference in religious matters. Government decides when the consecration of the temple will take place. Government wants to decide in which language you should worship. Government gives a direction. You celebrate the death anniversary of an atheist former chief minister or a late chief minister, and the Hindu temples complied. It is not only an atheist chief minister, he was also a person who called for the burning of holy text of Hindus. And that man is being honored on February 3rd in every temple in Tamil Nadu. Annadanam is made in his name and not in the deity's name. These are shameful extremes of government interference in religious matters. Second, there are large tracts of lands, immovable properties left by kings, patrons, philanthropists, and so many people who had devotion and sacrifice in their mind. These properties are worth thousands and thousands of crores. In fact, in my calculation, the income that should come from immovable properties of Tamil Nadu temples and endowments alone is somewhere between rupees 5,000 crores and 6,000 crores. But government is getting about 200 crores every year. This means there's a loss of at least 5,000 crores for the Hindu temples in Tamil Nadu. The similar position in Andhra, in Karnataka, and Kerala, the lands were taken in the name of agrarian reforms long back. In my opinion, it's all illegal. Anyway, the picture is government is not taking care of the true income that should be realized from these lands. They are not even protecting the land. And very recently, September 2019, they came up with a government order in Tamil Nadu that the lands, the patta for the lands will be given to the encroachers and squatters. The land will be taken away from the temples and it will be given to all these brazen violators, which means Hindu spaces would be gone. By God's grace, I was able to intervene in this matter, and the Honorable Division Bench of the Madras High Court was pleased to grant a stay of the infamous government order. And we recently saw in Tanjavur how brazen was the interference by atheists and leftists in the consecration matter, and how government kept their mouth shut and was in tacit supporting them. Again, I had to intervene. I had the case was conducted by the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court. And even though there were umpteen precedents, the case, the first place should not have been taken up at all. But it was taken up for hearing, and there was so much noise in the media. All because they wanted to change the tradition that was prevalent in the temple for 1,000 years. Of course, the court did not allow it finally. Third is the day-to-day administration of the temple, which is full of corruption and inefficiency. Corruption to the core. You take the temple money and buy not just one fully loaded Innova car, buy 4 of them for the use of the Minister for Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Department. 1 car from Arunachaleshwara Temple in Tiruvannamalai, Tamil Nadu. 1 car from Kapalishwara Temple, Mylapore, Chennai. 2 cars from Thiruverkadu Temple near Chennai. Why does the HRNC minister is given a car by the government itself? Why does he need 4 cars, fully loaded Innova, from the temple monies? Till recently, the commissioner of HRNC was using the car belonging to Mangad Kamakshi Temple. And at one point, when I told him that you will be going to jail under section 409 of the Indian Penal Code for misappropriating temple property, I hear that he promptly paid the car bills. At least he did it. The previous commissioners did not do that. Rank corruption. Everything from the tender, from the expenses, all inflated, false expenses, donor paid expenses shown as temple expenses. And finally, a very, very alarming position and a very, very shameful position, that is, government does not care for the heritage and aesthetic and antiquity in the ancient temples. For example, in Tamil Nadu, there are at least 8,000 temples which are more than 100 years old. All these are heritage temples. But government allows renovation, and in the name of renovation, everything is changed. The old pillars are taken away. Icons or statuaries are all removed. It's a huge loss for the posterity, for the temples, for their heritage and everything. And all in the name of contracts, all in the name of how the contract price could be inflated and given to upstarts. In the first place, the law does not allow any renovation of temples, but government doesn't care about it. They go on and damage the temples in the name of renovation. Now, these are the 4 aspects by which government interferes in temples. The 5th most important aspect is they have alienated Hindus from administering their own institutions. That means, for a Hindu sampradaya or a community, you are denied by the government the fundamental right to maintain and administer your own religious institution. While this is available without much ado for the members of other religious communities, Hindus are denied their fundamental rights, and by refusing to get the or not getting the true income of the temple, the Hindus' power to profess and practice their religion, build institutions, do charity, they are all curtailed, they are all done away with, and Hindus have no say in their own temples. So these are the 4 or 5 major ways by which government control is damaging Hindu temples. It is denying Hindus of their fundamental rights. It is causing Hindu spaces to disappear right from our eyes. I would like to sum up like this for the moment, and I'd like my good friend Sai to continue.
Sai, over to you. Please, yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sri Ayerji, for actually having me as part of this particular discussion. And it's always a privilege to share space with the T.R. Ramez, sir. Something that I think behoves is whatever I've learned about the temple ecosystem and the manner in which the governments across the country have actually taken over this particular ecosystem at the expense of the community's rights. I've learned it at the feet of Mr. T.R. Ramez, Mr. Krish Nagarajan. Thanks to them, I've had the opportunity to work on the matter filed by Pujya Swami Dayanand Saraswati ji. And I've learned extensively from Dr. Swami's works, which I get to read over and over again in the judgments, especially in the Chidambaram judgment. So whatever I know is largely because of them. And over that particular knowledge, I've managed to superimpose whatever little I know of the Constitution. So I think I'll start with that attribution first. Any faults are mine, and anything that's good has come from them. So that's one. Coming to the question of this entire problem, I've been trying to speak on this particular issue more from the standpoint of a lawyer, because I don't see it as an activist. I see that as a Hindu and as a lawyer. These are the only two roles which I play when I look at this particular issue. And to my mind, apart from the nuts and bolts of the specifics in which the government undermines institutional authority or institutional autonomy of Hindu religious institutions, I think, first of all, people need to realize the most important aspect, which is that Hindu religious institutions are perhaps the only institutions which are capable of exclusively focusing their energies onto Hindu interests and protecting us. I don't expect any political body, any so-called cultural organization to devote undivided attention and energy to Hindu interest and Hindu religious interest in the manner that dharmic institutions can. And therefore, the nexus between the autonomy of Hindu religious institutions and Hindu civilizational survival is as clear and as direct as it can get. And according to me, to use Mr. Anand Ranganathan's language from a tweet that he put out today, it is embarrassingly obvious. Okay. So I do believe that I don't need to prove that the straight line is indeed straight. These are two dots and the two bindus are connected by a straight line, as simple as that. So if the temple exists, dharma exists, and if dharma exists, we survive, and if we survive, Bharat survives, as simple as that. Okay. So this is something that, yes, sir, you want to say something? Yes, sir. I am not able to hear Sri Ayerji for some reason.
Yes, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of what I was telling both of you, that I have muted myself when I was trying to talk. So, Sai, you have another 8 to 9 minutes. So please feel free to complete your thing. You have some more time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the civilizational issue, or let's say, and it's not civilizational. This is not an issue that is actually meandering at 60,000 feet. This is as direct and as worldly and as mundane as it gets. One of the reasons that I think a Hindu feels alone is because he does not have the support of an institution which backs him and his interests legitimately. And we constantly assume that whenever we stand up for a Hindu cause, we're alone precisely because there is no institutional backing. And that is what separates the majority community, which is majority only in numbers but not in its mindset, from, let's say, other communities in the country for that matter. And I think institutions, especially dharmic institutions, are perhaps best placed to actually create a pan-Hindu identity, which I think has been a political struggle for such a long time, and I think we have miserably failed, notwithstanding what has happened since 2014. Okay, I think you've managed to cobble together an anti-pre-establishment position, but you have not still managed to forge a Hindu identity, which only a temple can. This is the most important thing that must be understood about the reason why we keep fighting for this particular issue. Everything else, according to me, is peripheral. Resources are ultimately for a certain purpose because they're a means to an end. The question is, what is the problem statement and what is that end? The end is Hindu institutional freedom for the sake of Hindu institutional interest, for the sake of Hindu civilizational identity, period. So at the expense of repetition, that's my problem statement. That's how I define it. Second, the question that I would like to ask myself as a practicing constitutional lawyer is, am I asking for something that is anti-national, anti-constitutional, against the spirit of the Constitution? No, I'm not. Not at all. Okay. Assume for a moment that the Constitution is not a civilizational document and it is not a Hindu document. For a moment, let's assume that is not the case at all. If you happen to be a secular institution or a secular state, then all the more reason that my position is validated by a secular constitution in the manner in which we keep professing this militant value in its militant form. Okay. So if you subscribe to this particular brand of Indian secularism that has come about over the last 30, 40 years, then there is absolutely no reason for the justification for the state's existence in Hindu religious institutions. Okay. Then in which case the question then becomes, are we saying that the state has no role to play, or are we saying that the state has a limited role to play? If yes, is that role limited only to Hindu institutions? What about other institutions? So let me answer the question. One, those provisions of the Constitution that deal with institutional autonomy of religious communities are not peculiarly designed to interfere with Hindu religious institutions. They are meant to either interfere with everyone or not with anyone. Okay. Unfortunately, the manner in which these provisions of the Constitution have been given effect to by state governments is by design meant to interfere and entrench the state in Hindu religious institutions. Okay. So this is the current state of affairs. And most people assume that this is something that is peculiar only to the southern states, or let's say certain states in the east and certain states in the west. Ramez sir and I, in fact, including our research team, we have gone through this. Over 15 states of the country, from the north to the south, from the east to the west, suffer the state's presence across the board. Okay. And the reason why this has become so prominent in the south is, unfortunately, thanks to the vicissitudes of history. Southern parts of India are the only parts where you still have so many temples. Unfortunately, that is the case. Okay, so therefore there is more temple treasure to be looted, and there is no more temple treasure to be plundered, all in the name of course, now the new value is secularism. Previously it was zakat and tithe and jizya or whatever it is. Now it is secularism, as simple as that. Okay, or the version of secularism the way we practice it today. So I want to bust the myth, and I want to use this opportunity from this platform to bust the myth that this is an elitist issue. It is not an elitist issue. And most importantly, let me say this as provocatively as possible, this is not a Brahminical issue at all. Because the temple as an institution belongs to the entire Hindu community, and it belongs to people who have built that particular temple. Therefore, there is a denominational ownership, there is a community ownership in each place. Therefore, when we speak of Hindu institutional autonomy, we are speaking on behalf of everyone, or at least in the interest of everyone, if not on behalf of everyone. Okay, this is something that needs to be understood with clarity. 3, what is it that we can do? Where do we stand today? Thanks to the efforts of Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji and Ramez sir, Nagarajan ji, and so many people, and Chilkur Rangarajan sir in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, so many people have been fighting, and there are, and I think there's the Namma Devasthana movement in Karnataka and other places. All these people have been fighting for so long, and they've been repeatedly going to court. But you see, at best, it is a surgery which is invasive in nature to some extent. It is very limited in nature. I don't think it is the best of solutions, because since 2012, when Swami Dayananda Saraswati filed his petition, that petition has been languishing for want of attention before the Supreme Court. The matter has been ripe for arguments before the Supreme Court for quite some time. And we are being led by some of the finest legal minds in the country, Sri C.S. Vaidyanathan and Sri Venkatramani, as senior arguing counsels in this matter. And yet, for some reason, the matter has not found traction before the court. And as I said before, the court has managed to hear triple talaq during the course of summer, but when it comes to this particular petition, it is not deemed fit to take up the matter. So this is one. So that's where we stand in terms of, let's say, the current actions filed against state entrenchment before courts. In fact, recently we even filed a mega petition of sorts on behalf of the Tiruchendur temple community, challenging the Tamilnadu HRC in a much more rigorous manner, and it's perhaps the most detailed action filed so far, challenging the TNHRC Act of 1959 under the guidance of Ramez sir. So this is something that we have done. These are the pending actions, and we are very, very positive of the merits of the case. We are very, very positive that our position is squarely rooted within the four corners of the law, of the Constitution. And most importantly, we don't even need to reinvent the law or invent the law, because there are enough judgments from 1960s which support us over and over again. In fact, the first judgment of the Supreme Court in this issue of 1954 continues to be in our favor, the Shirurmat judgment. So I think as of now, our hope is that as and when the court actually hears these matters, comes out with a landmark ruling, it could pave the door for, let's say, Hindu institutional autonomy, not just in the southern states, but across the country.
Thank you very much, Sai Deepak. And before I yield the floor to Sri Ramesh on what can be done, assuming that the control returns back to the people of India, the control of running the temples and managing the temples, because as these cases go through the courts, for example, there is a case in the Andhra Pradesh High Court about Tirumala Tirupati temple that Dr. Subramanian Swamy is fighting. And again, as this thing goes up to the Supreme Court, the one question that you can 100% expect is, fine, so the government shouldn't be running the temples. Who am I going to hand it over to? There are thousands and thousands of temples. Who is going to manage them? What is the guarantee that those people are going to not be corrupt? What is the guarantee that the pujas, the vidanas, the Agamous Shastras are going to be followed by them in the way that has been happening up until perhaps 100 years ago or sometime around that? So to understand this, Sri T.R. Ramesh has been working on a plan, and he will first give us his view, and then followed by that, Sri Sai Deepak will give his view on this. Ramesh, please unmute yourself. I muted you when Sai started speaking, and I cannot unmute you. But here we go.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. Thank you. First thing, Sai exaggerates a bit when he says he learned whatever about temples from me. That's real exaggeration. And one day you should have a debate on which is more, when is Sai more eloquent, when he's talking in debates like this or when he's arguing in a court. You should watch him argue in court. That's a real treat for people who have studied the various acts, various precedents of these Supreme Court judgments, Constitution, etc., etc. Now, coming to the point of alternate management. In the first place, I come to the second point. Will the Agama Shastras, will the rituals, everything will it be properly carried out? Yes, the main reason because government is out. And Agamas face no threat. Tradition faces no threat. And it will definitely be much better that scenario when the government is out, number one. Number two, today, government classifies the temple based on income. Most states do that. Take Tamilnadu for instance. Out of the 42 or 43,000 temples which are supposed to be under the control of government, about 38,000 temples are getting less than 10,000 rupees per annum, which means they are getting less than 800 rupees per month, which means they are getting less than 30 rupees per day. So do you need an executive officer? Do you need a government setup to manage 30 rupees a day? What can you buy with 30 rupees? Can you buy a liter of milk? Can you buy a dozen bananas? Of course, you're paying below the poverty salary or no salary at all to the pujaris. And if 30 rupees is appropriated by the pujari, do you have to have high-level enquiry committees and audit and all that? Managing a temple is best left with the community. Now, the position is, if the government leaves the temples, who will it be handed over to? That questions I get to hear in every forum which deals with liberation of temples. In my humble opinion, I'm not a legal luminary like Sai, but in my humble opinion, the position of law, the right law is, if you have taken something, taken control, if RBI is taken control of a bank or a cooperative bank and sets right the mismanagement or the whatever instances of mismanagement, it has to give the management back to the bank or to the directors. The same thing with company law board. The same thing with temples also. It has to go back to those communities, those hereditary trustees, or those group of trustees from whom we have taken over the temple. The only issue here is, it is not just 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it has been going on for 70 years. So you have to give to the descendants of the hereditary trustees or to the descendants of the same community or sampradaya. That is number one. Number two, HRNCE is today still following single entry bookkeeping. They are still following internal audit without even an audit manual. We can change all that with, once the temples come out of government control, we can introduce clauses by which transparency and accountability is ensured, audit is done in a timely and in an extensive manner, in a professional manner, and audit objections are resolved within 3 months. We can plug 95 or 99% of the holes that people are afraid of. That is not a big challenge at all. We can easily do that. So alternate management, all we need to do is, we need to figure out the temples. We need to classify them not only by income, but also by the footfall. How many devotees come to this temple? How big is this temple? Do we need extra efforts in maintaining queue discipline, in hygiene, in cleanliness, in how old is the temple? How do we protect the antiquity of the temple? How do we continue to maintain the conservation of the temple? We need to classify again. So once classified, the trustees will be given a scheme of administration which will cover almost all the aspects, and there'll always be watchdogs, there'll always be people interested, and any transgression can be immediately pulled up. Unlike the HRNC, where in Tiruchendur 5,389 cows donated to the temple disappear and no FIR is made. This is not the situation. This won't be the situation when the temple comes back to the communities. People need not be afraid that only government can administer temples and all that. They are possibly thinking of huge crowds and the police controlling the crowds and all that. Of course, there are huge crowds in the festivals of other religious institutions as well. Does not the police come there and regulate them? So wherever there is crowd, wherever there could be a law and order situation, police or revenue officials will come. And that doesn't take away the Hindu right to administer the temples. The second most important is the due realization of income from the properties endowed to Hindu temples. And third is, as I said, building institutions. We have to build our own schools. We have to build our own colleges where Hindu values are taught and Hindu children are given preference or given free education. And we have to build our own hospitals. Institution building is very, very important. That can be done only with the temples coming out of government. We had 400 odd Veda Pathashalas in 1947. Today, under the government control in Tamilnadu, there are only 4 Pathashalas attached to temples. So, institution building will happen. We need to look at the larger picture. We need to look at saying, we are Hindus. In any case, the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Department is manned by Hindus by law. They can't do better than any of us, and we can do better than any of them. So alternate management is not an issue at all. There are schemes of administration framed by district courts or high courts 50 years ago, 60 years ago. HRNC comes in, it throws the scheme into the dustbin, and it does arbitrary management. All we need to do is bring back the scheme and introduce clauses of external audit, professional audit, introduce transparency, and bring most aspects of Right to Information Act, voluntary submission to Right to Information Act, most of the provisions. We need to publish the expenses and income. We need to keep the whole administration transparent. And it's not a rocket science at all. People feel unnecessarily think it's a very complex thing only government can do. I say only government can't do. It will be manned by people, local communities who are devoted to the temple, who are loyal to the temple. For 2 generations, maybe we did not administer temples, but we'll learn it quickly. And the earliest schemes of court will be modified and presented to the Supreme Court of India, which in its wisdom will perfect the schemes. And there we go. That's it. I don't think people should keep away from the question, thinking it's an impossible task and all that. If you are talking about caste-related issues and all that, there is a different act for that. The Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Act of various states are not meant for any squabbles that may arise out of caste. None of the acts deal with that. There is a Temple Entry Act which will deal with them. And people say, will the women get representation? Will Dalits get representation and all that? Yes, they will be given representation subject to Article 26, which speaks of fundamental Sampradaya rights. They will be given the rights first, and nobody will be stopped from attending the pujas or having darshan or participating in worship, participating in festivals and all that. Those days are gone. There are only detractors who are afraid of Hindu institutions growing up in size, volume, income, and in footfall. They object to alternate management by the Hindus themselves. Thank you.
Sai, if you could unmute yourself and start your response, please.
Yes, sir. So I have 2 levels of response. One is a negative response and the other is a positive response. The negative response is to basically highlight that Hindus don't need to prove their integrity and bona fides more than other communities to the government when it comes to running of their institutions. That is a matter of equality. That is a question of equality. Second, Hindus must certainly look at ways of ensuring that their administration is transparent so that they are clear that their institutions are in the safest of hands possible. Okay. My point being that the government cannot expect greater transparency from Hindus when it does not have the guts or the spine to ask similar questions of other communities. Any government, any dispensation for that matter. And nobody's an exception in this regard. Okay. 3, if you look at the challenges made to the HRC legislations before the court, frankly speaking, the only portions of the legislation which have been challenged are those portions which actually facilitate entrenchment, not those portions which facilitate audit control or audit check. Okay. So a supervisory presence of the government to see that the institution is being run transparently and fairly is one thing, and which I don't think any fair-minded Hindu or fair-minded person is going to challenge. I don't think those are the provisions that we have called into question. The provisions that we have called into question are the provisions which allow the state to handpick individuals in the name of appointing committees, in the name of appointing fit persons, in the name of appointing executive officers, even in the absence of trustees. Now, coming to the question of who will it go back to? Well, it will go back to the same persons you took it from. As simple as that. Okay. After all, you must have taken it from a certain community or a certain group. You have to identify those people and give it back, because clearly you couldn't have expected to hold on to these institutions for eternity, because if that's what you expected, then you were hoping to get away with thievery in broad daylight, and which is exactly what has been called into question by way of these challenges. Okay. 2, the express mandate of the Constitution, even when the government takes over private institutions of public character, let's say private institutions where there is an element of public interest, is that those institutions can be taken over by the government for a very limited period, for a very limited purpose, under a written order explaining the reasons why that takeover has become necessary and identifying the period until when the government is expected to stay a tenant in that particular premises, and what is the transition plan that the government has in mind to give it back to the persons who the institution originally belongs to. Okay. 3, there are any number of ashrams and there are any number of temples in United States or in Malaysia or Singapore where they are being run by Hindus as a community. So surely it can't be our case that Hindus in the United States, America, let's say Singapore or other places are less corrupt or more efficient than Hindus in India. I don't agree with that argument, and that's something, that's a position that I have to necessarily stand up for, being an Indian in India, okay, or a Hindu in India. Okay. 4, I constantly hear this trope about caste being an issue and the institution reverting to Brahminical hegemony the moment the institution is taken out from government control. This is utter stupidity for a different reason, because the HRC legislation clearly prescribes certain qualifications for who can be a trustee and who is expected to be a trustee. It ensures that while there is a balance that is struck between tradition and rituals, you do not mete out caste-based discrimination. Plus, above anything else, you have Article 17 of the Indian Constitution, which ensures that untouchability as a practice does not find its way back into our institutions. A caste-based untouchability, of course. Okay. So the Constitution protects these interests. The specific legislations that deal with running of Hindu institutions, they protect these interests. And those are not the provisions which have been challenged by any of us in court. The only thing that has ever been challenged is the state's entrenchment, the state's appointment, and the state's big brotherly control of our institutions. Now, coming to, let's say, what is the alternative structure? One is the very structure that has been spelled out in these legislations for the creation, formation, and maintenance of these trusts are the very provisions that the government will need to give effect to. That's all we are saying. Okay. You have identified a specific solution as part of these very legislations which have allowed you to control our institutions. Give effect to that particular solution and recede a bit, back off, stay away. That's the basic sum and substance. Okay. 3, the important thing is, I think the government plays a lot of mischief here, where it manages to find a trump card or a plant who levels an allegation. It's a spit and scoot tactic that they employ, where they find someone who conveniently levels an allegation of corruption against an institution, and that paves the way for government entry into these institutions. And once the government enters, it cannot vacate. It's like the government under the Nehruvian dispensation. Okay, so it has become part of their PSUs. We are the Dasharatna of their Navaratnas. Okay, so our temples are effectively their 10th mega sector, from which, I mean, where they dip into liberally whenever they have a crisis, and our gold becomes public property, our land becomes public property, our deities become public property, everybody's public property, nothing belongs to Hindus. Okay, so I think there is a very clear constitutional answer. There is a very clear statutory solution which already exists in the statute. The entire discussion is, according to me, laser-like and surgical, which is there are specific provisions which allow you to do more than what the Constitution allows you to do. Those are the only provisions that we seek to limit. Okay. Now, assume for a moment that a Hindu institution tomorrow decides to use its property for secular purposes. At the very least, it will be called into question by the community. Now, when the government does it, it's almost as if it's become public property, because public property is nobody's property. There is absolutely no sense of stakeholdership or ownership among Hindus when it comes to their institutions. When they realize that this belongs to them, this is meant for their immediate interest, for setting up their schools, their Veda Patashalas and whatnot. Why just Veda Patashalas? You're talking of establishing schools for sthapatis. You're establishing schools for other traditional artisans. All the temple-based ecosystems which have survived for all these years, they will stand to benefit from this particular institution coming back to the community's control. I don't think there is any other country which calls itself secular where the majority has to make a case out for reverting of ownership for its own institutions. That is the sad reality. Okay, assuming for a moment, in fact, I think 3 years ago, a group of Mangalorean Christians approached me, specifically highlighting the fact that there was immense corruption in their diocese. and they wanted me to represent their interests. Here's the funny part. Corruption in other institutions of other religions exists. Okay? Surprisingly, those institutions and those communities don't rush to the government hoping for a recourse. Okay? But Hindus do it. Because I think there's a symbiotic relationship, an unsaid equation. Oh no, this is a Hindu country. If that's the case, you might as well say it aloud. If that's what you truly believe, that you and I are meant for each other, then you might as well say it aloud and put aside this hypocrisy of secularism. Okay? But if that's not the case, then kindly maintain the same distance from us as you do with other institutions. So, strictly speaking, if you were to just take a look at the Tamilnadu Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments legislation, there are specific qualifications which have been spelled out for the purposes of who can be a trustee. What must be the criteria for the disqualification of a trustee? So you have sections 25A, 26 of the 1959 Act. So unfortunately, what has happened is most of the discussions that happen in popular discourse happens without reference to the facts on the ground and happens without reference to the black letter of the law as well as the Constitution. Okay. So, Brahminical hegemony, frankly, it's a bogey. Caste-based hegemony is a bogey. Denominational ownership is a valid right under the Constitution under Article 26. What is the extent to which the state can be present? Supervisory, but not big brotherly. What survives of this entire issue after that? Nothing. But you see, case after case, if it is constantly fought, it leads to what I call community fatigue or collective fatigue. Because it's extremely slow. The judicial process is slow and it's extremely uncertain. But the one thing that both Ramez and I had thought of is that since the issue of charitable and religious institutions falls under entry 28 of the concurrent list, considering that this government, at least once in a while, claims that it represents Hindu interests, maybe by mistake, since it claims to do so, why can't the government actually come out with a model legislation? Why can't it task the Law Commission to at least prepare a report with respect to the problems that exist in the current ecosystem and, let's say, the state's treatment of Hindu religious institutions? Why are not stakeholders invited? Now, the only problem with that is if you ask for these calls, a lot of plants from the usual suspects will be placed before the committee by vested interests who do not want Hindu institutions to ever be autonomous. Because the moment Hindu institutions become autonomous and they're capable of flexing their muscles to protect their own interest, it affects their proselytizing interests. Okay, so obviously there is a vested interest which has an external relationship that always manages to play truant with our plans, so to speak. And there are any number of instances which even Ramez sir will vouch for, where let's say the commissioner of HRC or the executive officer, they end up being agents not of the government but of a different religious group altogether. Okay, that is something that we have seen over and over again, and this is something that rarely is called out. The fact is there is a vested interest that certain interests have in ensuring that there is no concept of Hindu institutional autonomy and in perpetuating the myth that Hindus are capable of running the country but are incapable of running their own religious institutions. What irony is this? Hindus can run government, Hindus can run the army, Hindus can run everything under the sun, but not their own religious institutions. It gets as limp-wristed as possible when you make that statement. Okay, it can't stand on its own 2 feet even to the normalist of scrutiny, so to speak. So the point I'm trying to make is remedy exists and it is already in existence within the statute books. Okay, but there is one question that I must address in a slightly different way. And this is a direct response to your question, sir. The court cannot ask what is the alternative to an unconstitutional mechanism. When the court is faced with unconstitutionality, it has no other option but to strike down the unconstitutionality, but it cannot say, let this unconstitutionality continue until you find a constitutional substitute. Because if that's the case, when section 66A was being struck down by the court, then the court did not ask the union to present it with an option which allows the union to meet certain security interests and also strikes a balance between fundamental rights and security interests. The court's job is not to ask for an alternative. The court's job is to rule on the law as it exists within the 4 corners of the Constitution. That is the sole job of the judiciary. The alternative is a question to be dealt with by the community and between the government, not the judiciary. Okay, so if we end up giving this particular issue, or we cede control over this particular issue to the judiciary as well, then we might as well be violating the separation of powers, because this is well beyond the pale of the power of the judiciary. This is not a question that the judiciary can answer. However, the judiciary can do something. What is it? There are enough and more guidelines that the Supreme Court has come out with particularly in the Chidambaram judgment, where Dr. Swami was leading the entire action, okay, where it has come out with certain dicta, where it has come out with what can be translated to guidelines. So pending a legislation that the government comes out with, or pending model legislation which is presented by way of a solution, the Supreme Court can invoke its power under Article 142, capturing all its ratio decidendi and dicta since 1954 in the form of guidelines, which does justice to our aspirations for autonomy and the manifest public interest in maintaining transparency. That is something that they can do. But it cannot be possible. It is legally, constitutionally impermissible and inconceivable for the judiciary to say, I will uphold something that is patently and manifestly unconstitutional, pending a constitutional substitute being presented in front of me. Not done, not possible, not conceivable. I think you have to unmute yourself, sir.
The intellectual level of this debate has seldom been seen in P-Gurus, and I thank both the participants for that from the bottom of my heart. In summary, I think India is ready. Hindus, Sanatanis are ready to run their own temples. I think the government is standing in the way. It could be the state government. It could be the central government. I don't know the jurisdiction about who has the rights to manage a temple. For example, if the central government were to say tomorrow that, look, all the temples shall revert back to the people who used to run these temples before the government stepped in, would that be something that the central government can do, or would the Supreme Court have to step in and pass that as a judgment? This question is to Sai Deepak, and Ramez ji, feel free to chime in after Sai has his answer if you feel like you wanted to add something more to it. Sai first. Please unmute yourself, Sai.
Yes, sir. So during the pendency of these petitions before the Supreme Court, if the government is truly interested in this particular issue and it is listening to multiple voices which are emerging as a chorus from different parts of the country, it is possible for the union government to impede itself as a party to this particular petition, present its views on constitutionality or unconstitutionality of the existing structure, as well as solutions. In fact, I think that the Ministry of Culture should perhaps take an interest in this issue, because this falls directly within the scope of its portfolio, within the scope of its agenda. Okay? Because you see, the Ministry of Culture constantly looks at dharmakshetras as tourist centers, when in fact they're dharmakshetras in the first place. Okay? Therefore, the question should be of maintaining the sanctity and the autonomy of these institutions so that these sampradayas and traditions can be carried on. Ultimately, the entire thing is about maintaining the energy balance in that particular place. That is the impact of these rituals, and that is the impact of an achara being put in place. So therefore, unless and until the spirit of that particular place is preserved and the people who are interested in protecting the sanctity of that spirit are given autonomy to protect that spirit, there is no question of monetizing it and there's no question of commercializing it. I have any number of instances where during the course of these discussions on this topic, somebody points out the Vaishnav Devi board and says, look, how beautiful it has become. Really, all that they've managed to do is crowd maintenance. Beyond that, in Katra, there was a time when you couldn't ever find alcohol and meat. But thanks to the commercial interests which are actually pushing more crowds into that place, meat and alcohol have become par for course on the way to Vaishnav Devi. So what are we really talking about? Maintenance of an institution is not just crowd maintenance, it is maintenance of sanctity. It is maintenance of these communities which are dependent on that particular ecosystem and which are interested in protecting it generation after generation. That is why the concept of a hereditary trustee must again find support. Fortunately, the law on that point is still clear. And when it comes to the judgment, if the Supreme Court is faced with a plausible option which the government is willing to present, then it could lead to a situation where the government can propose repealment of the legislation as opposed to it being struck down by the Supreme Court. Okay? But my experience whenever it comes to these issues is that rarely have I seen a government taking a clear, categorical, unequivocal position on these issues. It's always wishy-washy and namby-pamby, okay, which is neither here nor there. So it depends on which way the, let's say, the moods are blowing, or let's say the winds are blowing. So there is, so therefore, I put my faith, unfortunately, in a judgment which will ultimately say this is wrong. Enough is enough. And then somebody decides to say, now we have the stamp of approval that we need to proceed with this. So let's go ahead without any kind of controversy because we are only following the judgment of a court. Okay. So I think that is what has worked for the last 6 years or 7 years. So I think that is the way forward.
Thank you, Sai. Rameshji, would you like to add to that? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I unmuted. Okay.
Yeah.
Just adding a little bit to what Sai beautifully explained. The central government should do 2 or 3 things immediately. It shouldn't care for the state government's views or their existing laws and whatever. They have power because it's a concurrent subject. Number 1, they should mandate external audit for all places of worship, including Hindu places of worship. External audit. Today, under the Income Tax Act, if an institution, a sole trader, a partnership firm, or a company, if it has a turnover of 2 crore rupees, it has to undergo the rigor of a compulsory audit. And Tirumala Tirupati getting 3,500 crores, it doesn't have external audit. What an irony. And we know where some of these monies go. Okay? The Parani temple doesn't have an external audit. Meenakshi Sundaresa temple doesn't have an external audit. Padmanabha Swami temple doesn't have an external audit. So government should first mandate external audit with rigorous, mandate set for this audit objections, resolution, etc., etc. It also mandate the standards of accounting and reporting, publishing of accounts, etc. Third, government should declare all temples that are more than 100 years old as deemed monuments. That is, monuments in the sense living monuments, which means there cannot be any renovation in these places, no building of new mandaps or offices or toilets like they do in Tamilnadu. Nothing can be done. Because India is rich in these heritage sites and they should be maintained, they should be preserved.
Can I interrupt here for a moment just to add to what Ramesh sir is saying, and then I'll mute myself?
Yes, please go ahead.
Ramesh sir, with your permission.
Yeah, of course.
Temples which are 100 years old must be treated as living monuments. And those areas which we have relegated as tourist sites like Mahabalipuram should be revived as temples.
Beautiful. Excellent.
So, viewers, we have about 30 questions, and I'm not sure how much time the 2 learned gentlemen who are on the debate have, but I'm going to try and request and keep each answer to about a minute so that we can try and go through 30 questions. With your permission, Rameshji and Sai Deepakji, we're going into the formal Q&A session now. What I'm going to do is, some of the questions are directed against one of you, but some are general. So what I was thinking was just go alternate back and forth, one for each, and I will say that, if you could answer it XYZ, that would be great. So with your permission, I'll start the first question. This is from Kirti Kashyap. This is for Sri Ramesh. How to describe a temple to a youth or students of this time, especially those who do not believe in the concept of God?
Well, we do not care whether they believe or not. The truth is, the temple is the abode of God. As Sai already pointed out, what is more important there is not just the antiquity or the importance or the heritage or whatever, but it is the divinity and sanctity. It is a place where sanctity is maintained. The Devata has undergone a Prana Pratishta and is living there. That's the belief of Hindus. There are vibrations there. There are so many things that are done as per Agamous that have to continue to be done as Agamous. Temple is not an assembly of prayer. It is not a place of congregation. It is a living place of God. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. The next question is to Sai. Sai, the question is from Gokul Sreenivasan. What he wants to know is, Tamil Nadu High Court judgments support HRCE exiting temples if there is no administrative problem or corruption. What should the Sanatanis do to make this happen?
According to me, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is whether the institutional question is denominational or non-denominational. If it happens to be a denominational institution, then I think one of the issues that typically you could end up facing is finding the successors of that particular denomination who are willing to take over that particular institution. But I don't think that's a problem, because I think last year, December, I managed to tour about 30, 40 temples in the south. And there is a huge, huge interest that continues to exist in the institution. Then there are any number of people who would volunteer to take charge of these institutions. So I think what could be done is that for some of these institutions, you could put out a call, clarify the qualifications that are needed or that are expected of people who want to be part of that particular trust or who wish to be part of that particular trust. And in accordance with the HRC Act, to the extent it is not unconstitutional, prescribe the terms of engagement or the terms in which they shall operate that particular institution, in particular with respect to maintenance of religious traditions and performance of non-religious administrative duties such as secular duties. It's honestly not a big ask. It's not a tough ask at all. The community which is capable of running thousands of pandals for either Ganesh Chaturthi or for Durga Puja or whatnot under the sun is surely capable of running its own institutions. Okay, so frankly, I think whenever a chariot is actually drawn on the streets, whether it's in Jagannath Puri or anywhere else, I don't think the temple has to ask people to come and join. They just go there. People just land up in that particular place. So there is already a spirit of self-reliance and there is a spirit of voluntarism when it comes to our religious institutions. The only thing is the public has gotten so used to adopting a hands-off approach because these institutions have been in government's hands that it's a question of tapping it back and the gene will activate itself. That's what I believe. The moment you make an outreach, the community will respond positively.
Thank you, Sai. And Geeta Muralidharan and Shiva Ramaprasad, most of the questions that you asked are already addressed as a larger part of this debate, so I'm going to skip those. The next question is from Anupama P. How can a common man contribute to freeing and prospering temples and our culture? I think, Ramesh ji, if you could answer that one. Hello.
Okay, there are three by which we could approach the issue, the government control. Hello?
Yeah. Please go ahead. We can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. There are three ways. One is by creating awareness. Second, by legal intervention. And third, like in the case of Ram Setu or Sabarimala, by doing an agitation. So these three solutions are interlinked, but you never know when you need to focus on one particular solution at what time. For that, you need to have Hindu associations, organizations come together. You need to have group of Hindu temple worshippers in each city, perhaps for each temple. And it should come together as a cohesive group, not trusting in any politician, not trusting in any political party, but only fighting for your Devata, like people did in Sabarimala case in Kerala. You have to be aware, you have to show interest, you have to question any unwarranted expense in a temple. You should ask a lot of questions under the Right to Information Act. These are all things which individuals can do.
Thank you so much, Ramesh ji. The next question is from Sri VS. We've already answered this question as part of a broader debate, so I'm going to skip that one. Thanks for asking, Sri. Raghavendra wants to know about the temple gold. I mean, this is everyday news now that some ornament goes disappearing, something is found to be plated, and so on and so forth. Is there a way we can freeze this until a broader verdict is reached? How do we do this thing? I mean, I'm really grappling myself with this question. There are so many people, you have this fear of God that, if you touch God's property, that something bad is going to happen to you. And that's why people never touched it. So how do we kind of put some sort of a moratorium or an embargo that it is impossible for people to touch the temple gold, jewelry, what have you? Question to Sai Deepak.
So the interesting part is, just a second. Am I audible? Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
I think Ramesh sir and I actually had an opportunity to think about this as part of our work on the Padmanabha Swami temple case. Okay, where I'm sure everybody is aware of the fact that one of the things that the Kerala government is trying to do is to take over the treasure in Vault B, and that's been at the heart of this particular controversy for a very long time. Now, the one thing is the status of anything in the temple, especially the jewelry of the temple, the gold of the temple, according to me, is that it belongs to the deity. Okay, so the first legal position that people must be extremely clear about in their own headspaces is that the property of the deity is not the government's property or even the community's property for that matter. It is the deity's property. And the only person who can actually take a decision with respect to the deity's property is the immediate guardian of the deity, which is the Sevayat, which is the priest. He is the first person to do so, or the Dharmakarta of that particular temple, who is the legal manager, so to speak, the crude translation of Dharmakarta in English, okay, who has a direct interest in that particular property. Therefore, the state has no business, and I repeat, no legal business whatsoever to even remotely think of the gold in these places. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, a moratorium is not called for. It is for the state to explain why this is in fact necessary. It is for the state to explain which provision of which legislation does it fall back on to invoke its powers to take over these properties. Unless and until it is in a position to do so, the moratorium is unwritten, but it exists. Okay? The point is, whenever this happens, Hindus in general are without awareness as to the means available or the remedies available against any government measures. And there are very few institutions or organizations which are actually working on this front to constantly stop the government in its tracks. Now, let me do a bit of Dindora petifying here, okay, which is People for Dharma has been doing this extensively with respect to states like Kerala. The Indic Collective has been doing it for a certain amount of southern states. Somebody like Sri Chilkur Rangarajan has been doing. So a lot of organizations are now showing up on the radar who are willing to stick their necks out and take and do whatever is necessary legally to prevent the government from doing this. To combine this with the previous question, at the very least, a common Hindu must support these organizations vocally and materially in order for these organizations to continue doing what they're supposed to do. And frankly, you don't need to write to the central government. At the very least, what you can do is to write to the endowment department and ask them, what on earth are you doing? What's your business with my property? There is, whether the politician fears legal action or not, he certainly fears communal action. In fact, there is a recent example of a temple belonging either to the Devar community or the Counter community being taken over by the government of Tamilnadu. And the moment that particular community came together and opposed that particular action, the government backed off. It's a question of numbers. It's a question of the community stepping up and specifically saying, I don't need to go to the court. I just need to show up in front of your office and do a dharna to tell you that we vocally oppose this and there will be consequences for this legally, at least electorally. The moment that happens, it automatically translates to the government backing off. It has happened more than once. In fact, Ramez sir had this personal experience, I think, on Aregowda Road in Chennai with respect to a specific institution. I don't wish to name that institution. I'll leave it for him to say that. Because Ramez sir showed up, and the moment he shows up, HRC officials scamper and they run away from the place.
You have become a real terror, Ramez ji.
I was able...
If at all there is a Hindu terror, it is Ramez sir, but for a good reason.
So, next question. Would you like to add to this? Because I'd like to go to the next question if possible, but please feel free. Gold temple gold.
I'd like to add a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, temple gold. Now there are two ways gold is contributed to temples. Simple gold offering in a coin or in the manner of a chain or something like that by a devotee for whatever reasons, and a specific jewel to be adorned for the deity, the god or goddess. Now, when a specific offering is made, it should be utilized only for that purpose. Supposing there are general offerings of gold and it accumulates, you can make them pure gold ingots and give it for gold deposits to be obtained in gold interest, provided there's a good guarantee by central government or RBI and all that. So that will help the economy, that will help the temple also earn some income. But government cannot force it. Government cannot say, you will melt all your jewelry, make them gold bars, and then deposit with us. They can never say that.
Okay.
In fact, Article 26 says, the institution has the right to own and acquire. It did not say a single word about alienating them.
The next question is in Tamil, and I would request Sri Ramesh to answer this question. Sai, Hindi question is coming your way next. Lakshmanan Jagannathan wants to know, ஐயா, பிரபலம் இல்லாத சில நகரங்களில் நிலபலங்களுடன் உள்ள கோயில்களுக்கு தினசரி பூஜைக்கு என நிதி ஒதுக்கப்படுகின்றன. 200 ரூபாய் ஒதுக்கப்பட்டால் 2 ரூபாய் கூட கோயிலுக்கு போவதில்லை, பூஜை இல்லை. இதை எப்படி சரி செய்வது?
அரசை கோயிலை விட்டு விரட்டி அடித்து சரி செய்யலாம். நிலம் இருந்து வருமானம் வரவில்லை என்றால் அந்த அரசு அதிகாரி மீது கிரிமினல் கடமை தவறுதல், that is the officer responsible for the temple should be proceeded against for criminal dereliction of duty, and he should be penalized. If the temple has lands but no income, who is government to give 200 rupees a day? Who are they? Are they in the temple for that purpose? அந்த நோக்கத்திற்கு தான் அங்கே கோயில் இருக்காங்களா? இதை ஒழுங்கு மரியாதையா அந்த சமூகத்திடம் ஒப்படைத்து விட்டால் அவர்கள் பூஜையை பார்த்துக் கொள்வார்கள், நிலங்களிலிருந்து வருமானத்தையும் பெற்று தருவார்கள். அரசு இருப்பதுதான் அங்கே தவறாக இருக்கிறது. அவர்களை விரட்டி அடித்தால், சட்டப்பூர்வமாக விரட்டி அடித்தால் நமக்கு அந்த கோயிலுக்கு நன்மை கிடைக்கும்.
மிக்க நன்றி ஐயா. कुमार विश्वजीत wants to know from साई दीपक, आप बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं, कुछ बुक सजेस्ट कीजिए इसके बारे में जानने के लिए. अनम्यूट.
या सो मेरे हिसाब से तो अभी तक इस पे कोई किताब नहीं है जो लिखा गया है जो इस पूरे मुद्दे का विश्लेषण करता है. हो सकता है कि रमेश सर आगे कुछ लिख लें या फिर हम दोनों मिलकर कुछ लिखें, लेकिन एक काम कर सकते हैं. तो ये एक बुक है जो आंध्र प्रदेश HRC लेजिस्लेशन के बारे में लिखा गया है और जिसमें इसका पूरा जो हिस्ट्री है इसको विस्तृत तरीके से प्रेजेंट किया गया है. ये है आंध्र प्रदेश चैरिटेबल एंड हिंदू रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूशंस एंड एंडोमेंट्स मैनुअल, पदला रामरेड्डी. ये इनफैक्ट मुझे रमेश सर ने गिफ्ट किया था. तो ये बुक्स हैं और अगर आपको पढ़ना ही है तो हम क्या करने वाले हैं कि हमारा जो पिटिशन है जो हमने तिरुचेंदूर मंदिर के बिहाफ पे फाइल किया है, जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट में पिछले साल दर्ज हुआ था या इस साल दर्ज हुआ था, उसको हम पब्लिकली रिलीज करने वाले हैं ताकि इस पूरे इशू का जो हिस्ट्री है, इसकी जो ऑरिजिन स्टोरी है और इसके जो नतीजे भी हैं वो भी हमने लोगों के सामने प्रेजेंट किया और कोर्ट के सामने प्रेजेंट किया है. सिर्फ उस पिटिशन को उसके जितने भी दस्तखत हैं उसके साथ अगर आप पढ़ेंगे आपको समझ में आ जाएंगे कि इशू क्या है और गवर्नमेंट किस हद तक मंदिरों के साथ हस्तक्षेप करती है, आपको समझ में आ जाएगा. आप सिर्फ उस पिटिशन को पढ़ लीजिए. आई डोंट थिंक यू नीड एनीथिंग एल्स टू अंडरस्टैंड द करंट सिचुएशन.
Thank you very much, Sai. That was a wonderful answer. The question goes back to Ramesh ji. This is a question from Shyam Sundar. Does HR and CE tell what they do with the excess revenue? Like if they say a school is built, a hospital is built in the hospital premises, what happens to the revenue that comes in? Is it part of HR and CE or does it go to some other department in the government?
No. If a building is raised in a temple property, the temple site, the rent naturally has to go to the temple. It doesn't go to the government. All income comes to the temple or to the mutt or to the endowment. There is a belief which is false that government takes away the income of the temples and puts it in the government account. No, it is not so. However, government charges an unbelievable 14% administrative fee of the total income and 4% audit fee of the total income in Tamilnadu. In Andhra, together it comes to 22%. That is more than 1/5 of your total income. So this is actually taxation by government in the name of administering temples. Nowhere in the world you will find a management fee of 14%. The luxury hotels, which are the properties which are managed by luxury hotel groups, they charge about 3% or 3.5% as management fee. One is it's a luxury sector. Second, it's a hotel industry, and it's a private venture. They charge 3% as management fee, whereas in the abode of God, where things have to be done for religious and charitable purposes, government is charging 18%, 22%. This is a shameful state of affairs. Now, government doesn't directly take your money and go, but it does find avenue to take it away. Like, they recently tried to take 10 crore rupees from temples in the name of corona relief. On one hand, government gives mosques 4,500 tons of rice from its funds. And on the other hand, they try to take funds from temples saying we want to feed the poor. So government having complete control over temple money, they misappropriate it without following the due process. We have tons of information on that. We have tons of evidence on that. We are going to put a few HRNC officials in jail over this matter.
Thank you, Ramesh ji. The next question again in Hindi to you, Sai Deepak ji. क्या हिंदुओं को भी गवर्नमेंट सब्सिडी दी जाती है जैसे मुसलमानों को हज जाने के लिए दी जाती है?
मुझे जितना पता है, मुझे नहीं लगता है कि हिंदुओं को कोई सब्सिडी मिलता है, लेकिन इतना तो जरूर कह सकते हैं कि जब भी कुंभ मेला होता है या फिर सिंहस्थ जब हुआ था मध्य प्रदेश में, तब गवर्नमेंट अपनी तरफ से अरेंजमेंट्स तो करती है, तो ये भी हमें ध्यान में रखना चाहिए। लेकिन एक स्पेसिफिक रिलीजियस पिलग्रिमेज या तीर्थ यात्रा के लिए, किसी भी समुदाय के तीर्थ यात्रा के लिए गवर्नमेंट अगर टैक्स के पैसे से उनको फंड करती है या फिर उनको सब्सिडी करती है, हो सकता है कि ये अनुच्छेद 27 के विरुद्ध जाता हो। और आज तक मेरे हिसाब से इस मुद्दे का जो संवैधानिक विश्लेषण है या फिर इसको किसी तरह से किसी ने कोर्ट के सामने चैलेंज नहीं किया है, जितना भी मुझे पता है। और किसी के ट्रिप को सब्सिडाइज करने का तो सवाल ही पैदा नहीं होता है, क्योंकि सवाल ये पैदा होता है कि वो पैसा कहां से आता है, कंसोलिडेटेड फंड से आता है या कहां से आता है। इनफैक्ट ये फिर से इसका जो इस सवाल की जो दिशा है वो दूसरी तरफ भी जा सकती है कि माइनॉरिटी वेलफेयर कमीशन का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैलिडिटी क्या है और उसका पैसा कहां से आता है। अगर उसको भी टैक्स के पैसे से ही निकाला जाता है तो फिर एक किसी समुदाय के लिए आप ये सारा जो पैसा है, ये पूंजी आप क्रिएट कर सकते हैं या नहीं कर सकते हैं। तो दैट इज माय ब्रॉड रिस्पांस टू दिस पर्टिकुलर क्वेश्चन।
Thank you, Sai. That was wonderful. So next question is to you, Sri T.R. Ramesh. It is from Professor R. Vaidyanathan. I think you partially answered the question, but I want to round it out. What he wants to know is... Hello. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello. There's some static here.
Oh, okay, okay. Just bear with me.
Please.
Yeah, I'll ask the question again. The question is from Professor R. Vaidyanathan. He wants to know the gold that is being used by the government. Is there a way to prevent it? Views and methods to prevent that?
Gold being used by government where?
Well, it goes out and it's gone. Like, for example, it goes out for plating and we don't know what comes back. Whether it is just a plate of gold under and iron underneath, or it is really the original gold that went out. What he's generally broadly asking is there a way to completely stop the government from touching the gold?
Government from touching the gold, government from touching the ancient icons inside the temple, government from laying its hands on temple monies to buy Innova cars for ministers. There's only one solution: throw government out of temple. Legally and effectively and very quickly throw them out of the temple and bring external audit, bring transparency. That is the only way to do it. With the current setup, the current legislation, and the current speed by which courts are running, we can't do it. We need to get a central act. If the central government really means they will protect the interest of every citizen, they will protect the constitutional right of every citizen. The gold solution would be only for a limited period or a limited purpose. They say in Tamil, "Noi nadi, noi mudal nadi." You treat the symptom and you treat the root cause also. So the root cause is government presence. Throw them out. Put many of them in jail for their dereliction of duties, for their offenses, for their omissions and commissions. That will be the solution.
Thank you, Ramesh ji. The next question is to Sai Deepak ji. Tamil Arjun wants to know, how about the temples owned by scheduled castes and scheduled tribes? As far as I know, I have an answer, but I'd like you to first take a stab at giving the answer, Sai.
The HRC legislation does not strike a distinction between non-scheduled caste temples and scheduled caste temples. As long as it's a Hindu temple, that's the end of the matter. Okay, it falls within the scope of this. So, if the question is to bring in the caste element, the HRC legislation does not distinguish on the basis of castes. It merely goes after anyone who is a Hindu. So, I think this is one important way through which we can consolidate the Hindu identity by highlighting the fact that this particular government, especially in Tamil Nadu, which constantly speaks of Dravidar and Adi Dravidar and constantly speaks on their behalf, has not made an exemption even for their temples. Okay, in fact, I think it would make for a fantastic case study to understand how many such temples exist, what is the status of their temples, and if an executive officer is presented even in those temples, then what is the government's justification for entrenching the presence of an executive officer in those temples? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. So, strictly speaking, the law does not strike a distinction at all in this particular regard. There are no exceptions.
Thank you, Sai. The next question, there's a small clarification from Professor RV. What he really meant was there are moves by the government to use gold for the purpose of handling this pandemic coronavirus. That is a no. There has to be other ways to do it, and how to prevent that from happening.
I am to answer. Sai would be able to answer better, but I will
Sure.
give my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Please give 2 cents.
Yeah.
Okay. Sai a little while ago said, under which provision of which act they are trying to do this. They actually have no legal backing to do this. This is pure alienation of temple property. This cannot be done by government. The trustees alone have, the Dharmakartas alone have rights over the property management, and even they cannot alienate, and they should not alienate. If gold was given to a temple, it was meant to be retained as gold, because a fixed deposit goes up in value through interest and reinvestment, etc. But gold, as we recently saw, it shot up in price. It never comes down. So it is a different kind of investment. And the devotee who offered it to the temple had that in its mind. So the pious purpose, as it was laid down in the unanimous judgment in the Ayodhya bench, the constitutional bench, the pious purpose for which it was given should not be misused or diluted or done away with.
Thank you, Ramez ji. Sai, if you could answer this question, and this will be our last question. Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Sai.
So the one thing that I think is very important. Am I on mute? Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a few weeks ago, in fact, when the lockdown was imposed, I saw an interesting LinkedIn post, and I was amused as well as fairly frustrated with the stupidity of the LinkedIn post, where a bunch of lawyers had actually gotten together and some juniors had come up with the idea, why don't we draft a petition asking the Supreme Court to direct that all temple resources and land and money should be surrendered to the government to be able to foot the bill and the expenses incurred in meeting this particular emergency. So you see, there is only so much that we can point fingers at the government at, okay, because there is a humongous amount of stupidity that runs rife in a lot of minds which are Hindu in name only, okay, and abundant constitutional ignorance. And these are practicing lawyers, by the way, okay. These are practicing lawyers who would, of course, have read Constitution perhaps in the first or the second semester, and they would have forgotten all about the first principles of Constitution and institutional autonomy. So they came up with a suggestion, and lo and behold, the comments made for even more interesting reading. Yes, we must ask governments to open everything. Yes, we must ask temples to surrender their gold. None of them even ask these questions as to whether this can be done. What are the rights of the particular institution? See, here's the funny part. This is the deracinated secular idiotic mind, which believes that the institution is its father's property, which it is not. It is not anybody's paternal's property. Okay. And it is the community's property, but more importantly, that is the deity's property. That's the first thing that they need to understand. Therefore, even any lay Hindu cannot say, this is my property. Legally, that would be incorrect. Further, forget morally, ethically, and any other way, so to speak. So, that's second. What we also need to understand is, as Sir rightly points out, governments come out with these in the hope of inciting passions from people who then say, yes, we must all do this. Therefore, before you go after the government, at least the fence sitters within the community and those people who are willing to listen to the issue with an open mind, they must listen, they must be reached out to, and this issue must be democratized as much as possible, because it's about creating a sense of stakeholdership among the Hindu community, that this institution is the only institution that protects us. Unfortunately, what passes off as liberalism in this India is idiocity. Okay. And therefore, whenever they think of Hindu institutions, their Udarwadi nature comes out. But whenever it comes to any other institutions, they immediately find fascism and Nazism in those, let's say, measures. Okay. So I honestly believe that the first thing that we need to do is to address these idiots in the community. Okay. And they need professional help, according to me. Okay, and professional help from someone who is a qualified professional when it comes to constitutional law, to tell them, you may have a law degree, but that doesn't mean that you're an expert on the constitution. And all your opinions about what is right cannot translate to constitutional values is something that we need to say loud and clear, and perhaps as brutally as possible.
Thank you very much, Sai. And Ramesh, I have muted you. Could you please unmute yourself and then add what you wanted to say? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Today, I learned a bit from articulation, various replies. As before, as ever, I'm grateful to him. I just beg to differ with him on one aspect. I don't think there's an animal called a non-denominational temple. Every temple is a denominational temple. Every temple belongs to one sampradaya or other. And there is no such thing as non-denominational temple. Even if a temple has both Vishnu and Shiva, or it has all the major gods of all the 6 religions within Hinduism, Ganapatyam, Sauram, Kaumaram, Shaktam, Vaishnavam, Saivam. It has got all the gods. It will still be a Hindu temple, and it will be a Hindu denominational temple. This is my humble belief, but Sai knows better as a legal luminary. I would like to take this feedback offhand or a little later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sai and Ramesh. This brings us to the end of this rather enlightening program. We've understood a lot of nuances here. We understand the differences. What is denomination? What is sampradaya? And in fact, if I had the will, if I had my way, I would like to have all the Sanatana Dharma related things not be dealt by courts, but be dealt by our acharyas. Those are the ones who know this stuff the best. But be that as it may, we are in a democracy, and it's happening in a different way. But I think what this conversation brought about, I won't call this a debate because there was no pro and con stand, as much as there was a view at things from a dharmic level, and the same thing from the prism of a legal standing, how the constitution looks at it, and so on. So both of you have been brilliant. I cannot express words to thank for the kind of hangout we had today. And viewers, those that I could not accommodate by way of questions, please do send them to this YouTube hangout. And when Sai and Sri Ramesh ji have the time, perhaps they'll be able to take a look at it. I'm not guaranteeing that. They are very, very busy people. They are actually fighting our fight. So we should encourage them for that. And thank you once again, both of you, gentlemen, from the bottom of my heart. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram, sir. Thank you.
And thank you for this opportunity. Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.